working on a 3D prototype currently. Well, we have a PhD student allocated solely for this purpose. And it's to really aim to see the added value of going from 2D to 3D. And at 2D, there's you have a rather thick, it's a rather thick slice, but then there's also a slice gap on top of that. And so you can increase your in-plane resolution to a certain extent, obviously at the detriment of your overall scan time. Our current scan time for the 2D sequence is about, I believe, 5 minutes and 50 seconds. So it's rather swift, and the post-processing is also rather swift, with some of these Myelin techniques aiming to characterize that fast relaxing signal of the water associated within the myelin lamellae can involve rather intense computational efforts, such that in a clinical environment, they may not have the computational power necessary or the time available to be processing that data. And so the synthetic MRI method is pretty fast post-processing wise, but also in terms of acquisition, it's CE marked and has FDA approval. And so that's really why we chose it. But certainly it comes at a cost. It's not freely available. And so you would need to determine if it's right for your clinical center, certainly. And so for our study looking at the 3D versus the 2D, it's important because especially when you're trying to characterize the dynamics of myelination, specifically lesions, small lesions obviously can occur. I mean, even moving forward, we've done work at 7 Tesla looking at cortical lesions. And for example, subpeel lesions are incredibly difficult to characterize. So there will always be smaller, more subtle myelination that you want to capture. And 2D with these rather thick slices has certain limitations, no doubt. And that's why it's, in my opinion, it's always been the biggest limitation of the SciMR method itself was 2D. Well, I'm hopeful that we can remove that limitation coming forward, because we would like to, especially looking longitudinally, if you have a lesion, let's say you catch it just right at baseline, 3 slices, say, but then you don't catch it ideally and you have 2 slices with a partial volume slice. SciMRI does a decent job accounting for these partial volumes, so it does do a rather good job at 2D, but that can certainly be overcome in a 3D acquisition with higher resolution. I believe right now we were working on a proof of concept at 1.1 isotropic, but we'd like to get that down to 1 millimeter isotropic. That's really our goal, to have the best clinical value, because that's what our standard T1 weighted. We're working mostly on Siemens platforms, so the MEMP Rage, T2 Flare, certainly. So that's one aspect that we're really looking forward to working with, but then also determining the sensitivity of the sequence to capture demyelination, but also remyelination. There's a bevy of novel emerging therapeutic options for remyelinating promoting therapies. We just recently saw the tolobrutinib study come out looking at paramagnetic rim lesion enhancement, or rim lesions, by Daniel Reich. And so it's just about providing all these tools, all this different redundancy to best capture and characterize these emerging treatments. Because you don't want to have, say, a treatment works, but it doesn't. But I would argue that it's just as bad to have a treatment, certainly, that does work, but we just don't fully understand it. And we don't have the redundancy to capture and characterize. Say something is great at limiting sort of the diffuse factors of demyelination throughout normal appearing tissue. But if our primary efficacy endpoint is GAD enhancement, well, then we'll miss it. And that would be very, very unfortunate for all of the people with MS that could have benefited, because there are so many, and it is such an incredibly debilitating disease. And so we would like to try in a real world observational, just extracting MRI scans, specifically those that have the synthetic MRI sequence, to taking global measures of myelin content to see if we can look at differences in treatment, but then also when changing those who undergo certain types of treatment initiating. So many different options, but it's all about considering the unique perspectives about it, because you certainly, don't just want to go fishing to try to see whatever you can find. It needs to be very specific. You need to have your questions before the study initiates, and it needs to be very concise in how you approach it. So just roughly what's on the frontier for our group, and it's pretty exciting. We're looking forward to it.